Alright, I'm going to show some of the newer Airsoft players how to take apart, a standard version 2 gearbox. If you're new to Airsoft, your gun's probably an M4, and this would be it. Version 2 usually goes in an M4. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you are really confident with working on your gun. It can be a little bit complicated, and I'm going to try to make this review as simple and, detailed as possible. So, you know what, let's just begin. This is the version 2 gearbox. First thing you're going to want to do is you got 4 screws on the top. They can be either Allen heads, which mine are, Phillips, or star wrenches. You got 4 on the top, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there. You want to take all those out. Once you do that, you're going to want to make sure your gearbox is facing this way, and then you're going to want to take the upper shell off. The easiest way to do this is I put my finger on the spring and just try to lift up on the shell. You want to keep your finger on the spring because with your spring under tension, if you don't have it on there, it could shoot out and you could lose it. Once you have your finger on it, you're going to want to take out the spring guide, which is this piece. You're just going to want to lift up and pull out and make sure the spring is, controlled. You have a hand on it. Take that and you can set it aside. And what we have here is, a version 2 gearbox. It's all the internals are in there. When you're taking it apart, you just want to make sure that it looks somewhat like this. You're not missing any parts. If you did it right, pieces aren't going to fly out everywhere. And you don't want that because you don't want to lose anything. So once you have it like this, take your spring guide out. You can pull out your spring. The piston might come with it. Take your spring, you can set that aside. Next thing, you can see your piston. You can slide this one out as well, and it should come out. Just lift up or something. There you go. You can set that aside. Once you have that all done, the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to take out this brass cylinder with this piece of plastic. This is the tappet plate. Mine happens to be red. They all come in different colors for different strengths and stuff. But before you take that out, you have a small spring right there. Now what I do is I usually take some kind of screwdriver or something pointed, maybe like a small Allen wrench, and get it under there, lift it up. You want to make sure you don't lose that, because if you do, your loading nozzle won't work right. So you're going to want to take that out now. Just like that. Set that aside. Now basically you're left with the gears, the anti-reversal latch, the trigger, and the wire and setup. Now taking out the gears is pretty easy. Just gotta pull them out. I start with the one that's on the top, and then usually the anti-reversal latch. There's a small spring on here, so you don't want to lose that. Probably can't see it from the camera, but just make sure you don't lose that spring. Take out this gear right here. You're also going to make sure when you're taking these gears out, the bushings, which are these small metal pieces underneath the gears, don't come with it. If they do, just pop them back in. Just make sure you don't lose them. And then you have the bottom gear. Take that one out last. Now you have all your gears. The last thing is the trigger and the wiring setup. I personally don't like to mess with these. They are a little bit hassle-some, especially the trigger. I would suggest just leaving that in, but if it does come out, basically there's a spring underneath the trigger. You just have to set it in there correctly and it'll be fine. I personally just like to keep it in there, so I'm not even going to mess with it. So reasons you might want to take your gun apart: clean it, add a new upgrade part, get into upgrading your gun. It's really up to you, but since you have the gun disassembled already, you can take the time to clean it. This is the upper half of the gearbox. You can wipe out all the old stuff, add some own silicone grease, make it work a little bit better. That's one of the main reasons you take apart your gun, or you can add a new upgrade part. So if you want to, you can clean it out now with just like a rag, then add your own type of grease to the bushings, and then maybe some up here where the piston rides on and the spring guide and etc. You're also going to want to do that to the opposite side of the gearbox as well. Now let's say you're done with whatever you're going to do, you're ready to put all the stuff back together. Basically you're going to do everything we just did in a reverse order, and I'll show that to you because It's pretty simple. You just got to make sure all the pieces are fine-tuned and ready to go. So first thing, take your little the flat gear. I think this is the spur gear, I really don't know. Set that in there, make sure it spins freely. If it does, you're good to go. Take this gear, you're going to want to make sure that they're facing upright too. See, this one has two different sets of teeth, so you're going to want it down, bigger set up. You're also going to see that the gears on this one stop halfway. Make sure it's set somewhat like this in the gearbox, where it's like even. So just find the bushing, set that in there, and then you can test spin the gears, make sure they're connecting and stuff. Once that's done, you can take the what is this, the bevel gear, I think, and just set that in there. But first you have to add the anti-reversal latch, and this is another can be hard piece to put in there. Like I said, there's that small spring there, it's sticking out right here. Basically this piece is going to be pushing up against this small little metal piece right here. So you take your anti-reversal latch right here, you're going to set it in this small hole. Nope, hold on a sec. Just lost the spring. I'm going to put it back on. Okay, so we got this. You're going to want to set it in that hole and make sure the spring is on that side. If you did it right, the anti-reversal latch should be springy, so when you pull it back, it'll go right back up to the spur bevel gear, whatever it's called. So it should be springy like this is. If you did that, it's good. And then you want to put in this gear. Now, the anti-reversal latch actually rides on this gear, the actual latch itself. So what you're going to want to do is pull back on the anti-reversal latch. This might be easier with some kind of, you know, screwdriver or something, just hold it back. But once you have it back, take your bevel gear and set it in the bushing. No, the anti-reversal latch isn't going to set in there correctly until the other half of the gearbox is on there. But as you can see, it's in there. It's springy. To test this, just spin your gears counterclockwise. If they're spinning, you know you did it right. Nope, and I just lost my anti-reversal latch. Put that back in there. There we go. Like I said, it's not going to sit in there correctly until the upper half of the gearbox is on. So make sure, keep an eye on that piece because it might pop out. Next, take your cylinder assembly. You got the air nozzle, the tappet plate, the head, and the cylinder itself. And just basically set it inside the gearbox where it sits. You want to make sure on the tappet plate that it goes over the trigger housing. Right here, there's a little lip on the tappet plate and it goes over that little trigger housing. So just make sure it goes over there. If you did it right, it'll just set in there fine. You won't have to worry about it until you put the spring and stuff on. And then you're going to want to take the spring here. I want to latch it onto the tappet plate. Right there. Then, again, take a small screwdriver or an Allen wrench, or even your fingers can work. And you just want to pull the spring and put it onto the peg that's right in front. Shit. There we go. Now once that spring's on there, you'll see it's on there. To test this, you can push in on the air nozzle. And it should come back at you pretty strong. So to test it, to make sure it's alright, just do that. If it's doing that, you did it right. Next is your piston. On the piston, there's these little tracks that you can see right on the end there. These actually go onto the gearbox shell. There's a track there. You're going to want to make sure that the end with this rubber O-ring goes in. And you also want to make sure it rides the tracks. So get it in there. You can test it, wiggle it around, make sure it's good. Set it all the way in there. Next comes your spring and your spring guide. You're going to want to make sure you get it on the right side of the spring as well so it spins freely. Maybe this side. And also on the spring guide it has a notch as well, which goes into a notch on the gearbox. So what I like to do is put the spring in all the way so you can't go anymore. Then take your offhand, set it on the actual cylinder in the gearbox and just push in until the spring guide clicks into place. As you can see, we got it all in there. Now the last part, just make sure you're not missing any parts. If you are, rewind the video and see what you're missing. Next part, you're just going to want to take the gearbox, upper shell, you're going to want to set it on the actual lower half. Now when you're doing this, you're going to want to make sure you leave pressure on the cylinder, because that spring, if you don't, it'll shoot up and parts will go flying. You're going to want to make sure, since you have to line up the gears with the bushings and the anti-reversal latch with this hole, you got to make sure everything's lined up. You don't want to force it, you want to make sure everything's lined up first. Spring guide, bushings and gears, anti-reversal latch, trigger, and sometimes the tappet plate. And to make sure everything's lined up, you might have to use a tool to push some pieces into place. Once you do, it will click together, be solid, and it should be solid throughout the whole thing. There might be a little bit of cracks, but those will tighten when you put the screws in. Once you have it like this, you can just take your screws or reinsert them. You don't have to torque them down, just make sure they're tight. And then, hook up your battery and your motor, reinstall everything, make sure it works. If it doesn't work, some common problems you might have done with the gun is you might have messed up on the tappet plate and the whatever the front gear is. That might not be aligned correctly, so you might want to look at that. Another thing is you might have messed up on the anti-reversal latch. Sometimes that can get out of place and cause the gears not to spin or the gun to lock up. And the last thing would be the trigger. Sometimes the trigger will get out of place and just mess up shooting. So if you are having a problem, look at those three things. Those are the most common problems with the gearbox. Other than that, now you know how to hopefully take apart a version 2 gearbox.